I definitely remember having conversations with my parents, when I'd be eating like tofu or a veggie burger. And I can remember my mom kind of playing this game with me where she would say things like, now your friends at school, eat burgers. Is that the same kind of burger? Like, are you eating the same burger they eat? And I'd be like, no. And she'd say, why not? What's different about your burger? And I'd say, well, mine's made of veggies. Theirs is made of meat, or theirs is made of animals. And she'd be like, oh, and so why don't you eat that? And then I'd say, well, because I don't eat animals. I love them.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse.
Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson. Here at the Vegan Posse, we just wrapped up our special self-love series, a special series of episodes dedicated to expanding our tenderness, affection, curiosity, and sheer delight in one very important animal, ourselves. There are 9 episodes in total, featuring 7 amazing guests, guaranteed to give you a fabulous jolt of self-love. You can find the Vegan Posse Self-Love series on Spotify, Apple, and all your favorite podcast platforms. And while you're at it, please make sure to like and subscribe to let vegans who care know that they're not alone. Get another jolt of self-love from my novel, Marrying Myself, which has a vegan protagonist, was featured in Veg News magazine, and has been dubbed the anti-romance romance for its revolutionary self-love message. Visit my website, ChristineMelanieBenson.com, for all the details. And if you can, please leave a nice review on Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes & Noble. There's no better way of injecting veganism into the world of mainstream women's fiction and normalizing veganism through the arts. And now that our special self-love series has wrapped up, we're back to talking with amazing vegans from around the globe. Many of us bemoan all those years that we unwittingly or wittingly consumed so-called foods that were in fact the products of unconscionable animal suffering. And if you've ever wondered what it's like to be born and raised vegan, you can hear firsthand from today's guest, Sarina Farb, who grew up vegan and now, as an adult, devotes herself to carrying the message of compassion and liberation for all beings. So enjoy this conversation with born vegan, Sarina Farb.
Sarina, welcome to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
I am. Thank you so much.
No hesitation. I love it. Most of the time people hem and haw, but you are all in. Well, I met you for the first time, or at least the first time in depth. We perhaps crossed paths previously at Vegan Summerfest, but I recently met you at a gathering hosted by your lovely mother and previous Vegan Posse guest, Joanne Farb, which was out in Kansas. Did you grow up in Kansas?
I did, yeah.
And you were born and raised vegan, which
Yes.
is a very different experience from most of the rest of us, and I would imagine most people in Kansas. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was quite the experience. Very unique in a lot of ways, and at the same time, in other ways, somewhat similar. Like, we're all raised in unique ways, and every family has their differences. And what I like to say that all my parents did was really tell me the truth, a truth that a lot of children and adults alike are not told, and is intentionally and accidentally kept from them in all different ways. And so all my parents did was tell me the truth that we don't have to eat animals to live a happy and healthy life.
Wow. And do you remember the first time that you started realizing that not everybody else was being told the same truth?
I don't remember the first time. It's just kind of something I've always been aware of as long as I can remember. But I definitely remember having conversations with my parents, when uh, I'd be eating like tofu or a veggie burger. And I can remember my mom kind of playing this game with me where she would say things like, now your friends at school, eat burgers. Is that the same kind of burger? Like, are you eating the same burger they eat? And I'd be like, no. And she'd say, why not? What's different about your burger? And I'd say, well, mine's made of veggies. Theirs is made of meat, or theirs is made of animals. And she'd be like, oh, and so why don't you eat that? And then I'd say, well, because I don't eat animals. I love them.
How old were you at this time when you were having these conversations?
5, 6 years old.
And do you remember having any thoughts about the fact that most of your classmates and your friends were eating animals? Did you ever wonder why you couldn't?
No, I never wondered why I couldn't. I always knew from conversations and things like that it was very, like, when I say my parents told me the truth, it was very simple and straightforward to me. It made perfect sense. Like, we don't eat animals. We love them. We love animals. We don't eat them. Or cow's milk is for baby cows. Very straightforward, age appropriate things that made perfect sense to me, especially because we shared our home with, rescued cats and dogs and guinea pigs and some turkeys and geese when I was really little. And so having those personal connections to animals too, it was just so clear to me, like, I would never want to eat my cat. Why would I want to eat any other animal? So the harder part was understanding why my friends and other people were eating animals.
Right. I totally agree. It's like once you kind of see that reality, that's the question, not why don't I eat animals, but why do you? Why do you? I remember I literally asked a coworker that same question who would always hound me about being vegan, and I said, "Well, why? I think the real question is why do you?" He said, I was born into it. I'm not going to change now." Okay. Okay. So did it frustrate you or trouble you that you saw your friends and your classmates eating animals?
Definitely, especially the older I got. I remember one of the earlier instances I remember was after I was about 7 years old and I learned to read, and I had sort of gotten my own food choices, as my parents put it, where I had learned this set of flashcards of ingredients like casein, whey, gelatin, anything that I might read on a label that was an ingredient that would come from animals. And there were other things in those flashcards like artificial flavors, red dye 40, high fructose corn syrup, things that my family also didn't eat for health reasons. And each flashcard had like the ingredient on one side, and then on the other side, what it was, how it was made, and why we didn't eat it. So when I got to be about 7 and I was learning all of this, then my parents said, up until this point, we've read labels and made informed and educated choices about what's healthy, sustainable, ethical, etc. to eat. And now that you can read and we've imparted this information to you via these flashcards, now it's up to you. If you're at school or a friend's house and somebody offers you something, instead of coming to us and saying, oh, mom and dad, can I eat this? You get to read the label and decide for yourself. And so I really took that to heart and became very proud of choosing to be vegan. But I remember I was on this gymnastics team, and we'd get goodie bags after, or for meets and competitions that were usually filled with candy. And I would go through them about this time and read the labels myself, determine if it was vegan or not, and hand it over to my teammates. And I remember one girl asking me, when I handed her some candy, saying, oh, why can't you eat that? And I was like, oh, I can. I choose not to. And then, her saying, okay, so why do you choose not to? And I was like, well, it has gelatin in it. Do you know what gelatin is? And she says, no. And I'm like, okay. And then I proceed to describe in graphic detail what gelatin is and how it's made. And I remember I fully expected, because to me it was so obvious gelatin was gross, why would anybody want to eat it, that I would explain to her what gelatin was, and then she would also choose not to eat this candy. And instead, I finished my description and she goes, oh, whatever, and popped the candy in her mouth. And I remember just kind of standing there a little bit horrified in my head of like, that, like, what? What, like, I just told you what this is and you still want to eat this?
Right, right. And that kind of set you up for a lifetime of experiencing that same course of events in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, for the people out there listening who may not be familiar with how gelatin is made, can you give us a quick rundown? Because I will acknowledge gelatin was one of the ingredients that I didn't realize for a long time was problematic or gross. We think of
Yeah.
it just in Jello. Like, what could be more kind of innocuous than Jello? It's a diet food.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so gelatin is basically all of the leftover slaughterhouse byproducts, the bone, the eyeballs, the connective tissue, the blood. It's like a lot of the things left on the slaughterhouse floor that are all boiled, essentially heated to a very, very high temperature and boiled down to extract the cartilage and the connective tissue components. And so it comes out as, we see Jello or this, it's a thickener, but it's made from all of the leftover connective tissue and all of these gross leftover slaughterhouse byproducts after animals are slaughtered. And it's really one of the grosser things out there. I mean, it's all animal products are gross to me, but I think it's particularly gross. And I really thought explaining that to a fellow 7-year-old that they would obviously not want to eat that either.
Okay, whatever. Did you have any friends who did convert to veganism, who did start changing how they ate?
So in 6th grade, I was attending a Montessori school, and I kind of joke that half the class went vegetarian and half the class hated me. Because I was regularly bringing like why vegan flyers, or even if you like meat flyers, to school, and would quite literally open them up in people's faces as someone across the table from me was like eating meatloaf or a hamburger or something from their school lunch. And I would literally show them pictures of like animals having their throats slit, and be like, see, that's what you're eating. And was talking about veganism a lot. And many of them would ask me questions. Lots of these conversations came up because kids would ask me, why aren't you eating that? Or why are you eating a tofu sandwich? Or, why are you vegan? And so I would explain to them that, I didn't want to hurt animals, and then would share these things with them. And so there were a lot of students that definitely told me they went vegetarian or tried to cut out various animal products or hot dogs in particular, various things like that. And then there were definitely some students in the class that very strongly disliked me and what I was saying. And I remember one student who she actually went vegetarian for some of the information I shared. And then when I, with the support of my parents, also got like a school fishing day to do catch and release fishing canceled, that really upset her. And she came at me and was like, just because you got the fishing trip canceled, I'm not going to be vegetarian anymore. And I was like, it doesn't punish me. Like, you're hurting the animals, not me, by doing this. So I definitely remember some interesting interactions like that.
Wow. So you were really just very activist, just out of the womb, essentially. What about, and you have a sister, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And is she younger than you?
Yeah, she's 4 years younger.
And did you all have the same response to this information that your parents were sharing with you about animals and food?
Generally, yes. We have very different personalities, and she's not really an activist on this topic these days, but uh, she's vegan, and she too, I think, thought it very straightforward and obvious that it's unnecessary to eat animals and that we don't want to hurt them.
So tell me, did you ever, as you got older, did you ever question your veganism, or did you ever have a moment where you were tempted to lapse or just think, I just want to be normal? Normal.
Yeah, not on the topic of veganism. There were definitely points I just wanted to be normal. But there were so many things I did that were also put me a little bit outside of the mainstream, that I had plenty of other things that I could rebel over that did not involve eating animals. And, one way I show that is like when I did get to college, because up until college, I also had never eaten any artificial colors or flavors. Pretty much in my entire life, I'd never had a Coke or a Pepsi, or anything like that, literally ever, until I got to college. Because I never even wanted to try those either. I knew about, the health downsides of those things. Um, and then when I got to college, I did end up finally deciding to try and eat lots of the accidentally vegan, mainstream junk food, things like Sour Patch Kids, and definitely did drink some, rum and Coke and things like that. But I never, ever wanted to try any animal products, any animal flesh or secretions. And I think a lot of that came from my education and understanding why, right? Like I learned, oh, we don't eat red dye 40 because it's unhealthy. Oh, but I don't eat gelatin because it's a dead animal. And so there were obvious differences to me, and animals just simply have never looked, like I don't look at them as food. So there's no, I want to taste that or I want to try that. Especially for me, it was definitely easier to see like a cupcake, something that like you can't tell a difference from looking at it, whether it's vegan or not. And so it would be easy to look at cupcakes and be like, oh, cupcake sounds really good right now, but oh, that label says it's not vegan, so I'm not going to eat it. But yeah, did a non-vegan cupcake that looks the same as a vegan cupcake look appealing to me? Sometimes yes, but the minute I read the label and I know what's in it, it no longer is food to me.
And did your parents show you some of the more graphic videos? Like, what was your level of exposure to that really graphic, kind of violent content?
I didn't actually watch any of that until I was about 16 or 17, honestly. The most graphic things I saw were probably like the flyers we had that said, like, even if you like meat. I think they were a vegan outreach flyer at the time, that had some graphic footage of, animals being slaughtered, or not footage, pictures of animals being slaughtered. But I very intentionally, my parents never showed me Earthlings or, anything like that. I don't think they even watched that themselves. And they never encouraged me to, and I never wanted to. I was very sensitive to graphic footage, especially on all kinds of things as a kid. I hadn't really grown up watching TV or violent movies either. So I didn't really want to see any of that. And I think when I finally did, it was probably Peaceful Kingdom, The Journey Home, that I probably saw like maybe senior year of high school when it came out or something. One of those films was probably some of the earliest graphic footage I saw, and I never felt like I needed it. Like I I think my parents were right not to intentionally show it to me because I was very sensitive, and it probably would have unnecessarily traumatized me.
Right, right. I remember a long time ago at an animal rights conference in New York City hearing a woman who was raising her young children vegan talk about just how she incorporated that information about what happens to animals in the food system. And I still remember the story of how she brought them into the grocery store and took them into the meat section and showed them packages of chicken drumsticks, all wrapped in plastic, and said to them, "You know what a chicken is, right?" And of course they did, because they
Mhm.
visited chickens at sanctuaries and at those places, and they petted them. Yes, yes, of course. And she said, "So this is if you were to take one of those chickens and chop off his head and drain out his blood and pluck out all his feathers and cut off his leg. This is what that looks like." And, and she just described this as these two kids just staring at her just in horror, just saying, "But why would they have that in a store that sells food?"
Uh-huh.
And it just was so poignant, so poignant. I mean, kids just do get it, like you are conveying to us. It's not complicated and it's not hard to grasp. I remember another woman I met who was raising her little boy vegan, and he was like 5 years old at this time. And she said at one point she was explaining to him, a little bit about what happens to animals. And she said, he looked at her and said, "Why doesn't someone call the police?" And that just about broke my heart, because
Mhm.
when you really grasp that it's not just something that happens as, a tragic anomaly to an individual animal here and there, just like a human is sometimes, in a car accident or, struck by lightning or something, but that it's institutionalized, systematic, really methodical form of violence. It's just really, really wild to get your head around. So you were homeschooled for part of your elementary education in high school, is that right?
Yeah, on and off with, other forms of schooling mixed in.
Okay, okay. And then when you went off to college, how did you choose your college, and what expectations did you have for your college experience?
Yeah, so I went to Grinnell College, which was a private liberal arts college in Iowa. And there were a lot of reasons I chose it. It had a very good reputation. I really wanted to do something in the sciences. And I also went and visited it and was very impressed that they already had a full vegan bar in the cafeteria. So, whereas I was hearing stories of other friends I did know that were trying to get vegan stuff on college campuses, having to talk with the dining hall and get special accommodations. And it was very cool to walk in as a prospective student and be like, oh, there's like a soup, two entrees, rice, a salad bar, and a dessert at, vegan at every single meal, that's already just here. And they already labeled everything in the cafeteria, vegan or not, whether, other stuff beyond the vegan bar was vegan. And so that definitely was a big draw, that I knew it would be super easy to eat in the dining hall, and still have a variety and stuff like that. So, but they also had a really good science program, which was, what I wanted to do. And they had a huge history of progressive social justice activism. And so I was very excited about the combination of getting to pursue my interest in science and also bringing veganism and animal rights to the campus.
And so how did that turn out?
Not
How did
at
you
all like I expected. I think I went in very naive. Um, and especially because at that point I'd come from Kansas, where I felt like, there was lots of conservative politics around us at the time. And I was I didn't know. And I think it was also the social dynamic. Like, activism is a little bit more in vogue these days with young people for climate and environmental issues and numerous social justice issues. And it did not feel that way when I was in high school in particular. And so I was very excited to go to a progressive liberal social justice campus. And I truly, I think very naively now, believed that um, the only reason there wasn't animal rights activism on campus at the time was because, again, people just didn't know and hadn't thought about that. But they were, since it was a progressive social justice campus, all I had to do was show up and organize and bring the vegan and animal rights information there, and everyone would
And
jump
you'd be
on
met with
board.
open arms. Yes,
Yeah, like
yes.
I think I had this idea that I was gonna work hard, super hard, and create the first vegan college campus.
Wow, did you really think that?
I think some part of me really did. 18-year-old
That's
me.
beautiful. That's beautiful. That's very sweet. Yes.
That did not happen, though. Grinnell is very much not a vegan campus today. And I think I still was in the headspace of, people don't know this information, and that's why people don't change. And I feel like since then, my perspective has evolved to a much more nuanced, complicated understanding that information and knowledge is not the only thing prohibiting change on this particular issue. There are many, many deep cultural and social factors, and information alone is not going to create a vegan world, unfortunately.
Yes, yes. I think a lot of us kind of butt up against that that reality at some point. I think it was Paul McCartney who said, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think perhaps a lot more people would be, but certainly not everybody. People have a remarkable capacity for denial and just willing blindness. So can you describe, one or two of the moments or incidents where you just really realized that you were up against a resistance level that you hadn't anticipated?
So, oh boy, there's a lot. So first, when I got there, I figured from the vegan bar and everything that there would be like a lot of other vegan students on campus. And it actually took me the first semester or so to like meet another vegan, and to start a club on campus, you needed like a couple people. And so I kind of was waiting to find someone else to start a vegan club with. And then I did meet them. I met someone, but then it was really the second year when I really got activism, really going, and found some other vegans that were interested in activism.
So these were people who were already vegan like you?
Yes. I was not converting.
That's something, yes.
People on that campus at that time. But then we did a whole bunch of stuff. Like I went really hard my sophomore year. And one of the things that I organized was a pay-per-view. We got grant funding, and basically we're paying people $1 to watch 4 minutes of like some graphic slaughterhouse footage. And we had several hundred students that actually watched this footage. And I thought it went really successful. And then that was when the pushback started. And I started getting attacked on Facebook. People were writing posts, and people that I was not even connected with. And most of the people who were calling me out, criticizing me and my group and our activism, were other social justice activists on campus. It was not the average student, which there's no average student. Like it's a very small campus. But they were members and leaders who were championing other causes on campus and positioning themselves as progressive activists. And they started really heavily criticizing what I was doing, writing articles. And one of the things that like this really highlighted was that, oh shoot, where was I going with this? So one of the things that, I saw from this is I actually had put out like a comment card, and I had been very open about dialogue. And if you have questions or concerns or comments about what we're doing, like let's have a conversation, let's have a community forum, let's do what this campus is, claims to do, and build community and have direct conversation. And a number of these students just point blank refused to and wouldn't engage with me. They'd passive aggressively like write stuff about me online, but never actually respond to my messages or engage with me. And I remember one of them in particular, I reached out to, I could tell they were very upset. And I was like, hey, can we have a conversation about this? I'd love to, invite you to like sit down and talk about this. Just, so you basically like stop attacking me online and like, let's have a conversation. And I remember this person said, like, oh, don't you realize how ableist that is to assume that I can actually carry on a conversation with you about this? And I was like, we're on an elite private liberal arts campus where half of our classes are more built on being able to like debate and dialogue over topics. And they were like, oh no, I have too much social anxiety and all this. Like, this is ridiculous that you're expecting me to like have a conversation with you.
That's rather hilarious. Wow. Not that it's particularly relevant, but I'm just curious if there was a gender aspect to the pushback that you got online. Was it a lot of women, or was it a lot of men, or was it just kind of across the board?
I would say it was largely women and non-binary folks. I don't
interesting.
actually, it was not men.
Interesting.
For the most part.
Huh. Very interesting. What do you have any sort of explanation for that, or any sort of perception of why that might be the case? That's how it all fell out?
I don't. I haven't thought about that too much. I know later there were definitely, I got some critiques from some men. We had a whole back and forth with several response articles that were written about my activism, and then I wrote an article explaining and defending it. And but yeah, when I saw the pushback from these other social justice activists and groups on campus, that was when I realized how naive I really had been. Because in my head, I think the pushback I'd received in Kansas was, well, we're in a conservative farming region. These aren't, activist people in general.
Mm-hmm.
And what really caught me off guard was, oh, here I am on a progressive, activist-oriented campus, and I'm getting more, as much, if not more, pushback from people.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And just out of curiosity, what were some of the causes that these other social justice activists were, advocating for or against, the ones who came at you?
We had like a divest from fossil fuel campaign for, climate change and environmental stuff, which I also had some conflicts with some organizers in that group when they were serving milk and cookies at their meeting. And I was like, we're talking about climate change and serving cow's milk. And there was one group that I was part of, was just like a generic kind of anti-oppression network to support any cause anyone was working on, except they didn't super seem to want to support animal rights and veganism. But there were Black Lives Matter activists. That was kind of 2014 was like really the beginning of that movement in the way it is today. So we had some Black Lives Matter protests on campus and organizers. We had feminist groups, like gender and sexuality liberation groups, all of like most, a lot of left-leaning political causes today, that for me, being around activists for those other groups was fairly new.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, of course, there are, a good number of people these days in the realm of intersectionality, pointing out the commonalities between, for instance, feminism and animal rights, or, environmentalism and animal rights. But it sounds like none of these people that you were in contact with were intersectional in the slightest.
They would all, well, I think they would all say they were, except they also attacked each other. That was the very surprising thing. Like, it wasn't just me, and it did feel that way at first. And then I started to realize, like, there was just a lot of drama, and it seemed like no group was perfect enough for the other group. So
Okay, that explains a lot. Yes, because like one thing that I've learned, just the more I've matured and grown older, is just a lot of social justice movements and social justice activism is really about signaling, just virtue
yes,
signaling and individuating and pointing out how special and how um, rebellious I am. And instead of wanting to feel like a commonality or a unity with all other groups, sometimes people just want to point out how special and different they are. So that,
yeah,
and especially in, college age students, I would imagine that sort of signaling, which of course, from an evolutionary perspective, it all comes from, our evolutionary biology and, sexuality, flaunting our specialness and our
yeah,
unique qualities that make us more attractive to mates, especially in the
yeah.
case of men. So
One of
yeah.
one of the one of the big criticisms I got were from I don't know, maybe so-called feminists, but I'm not even sure that's the label. But I got a lot of criticisms about being triggering for eating disorders and body image
Oh, of
issues and food
course.
policing.
Of
That was like one
course.
of the biggest criticisms,
Uh-huh.
for what I thought was just like clearly just showing people were triggered, but um, they were triggered by the truth. Like, I was outside the dining hall handing out vegan ice cream samples with milk comes from a grieving mother flyers, and people were writing things online like, to sit outside the dining hall and shame people for their food choices really encourages food policing and body image issues. I'm like, I'm giving away free vegan ice cream. And
Right.
like, if you are feeling that bad from seeing one flyer about the suffering of mother cows, maybe you should change what you're doing instead of attacking what I'm doing online and trying to claim that, like, I'm the one not being intersectional or something. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. No, it's true though. The eating disorder label, that's a very easy, very easy target to throw around. Like, oh, you vegans are exacerbating eating disorders. Yeah.
yeah.
So how did college progress for you? Did you get some traction? Did your animal rights group club grow and become a little bit more, active and effective?
By my final year there, it did a little bit. It was mostly like I had a couple people who were very supportive, but the things that happened largely happened because I made them happen. And I really felt like I was doing the majority of the work. But my final year, there were a number of like freshmen and a few sophomores, I think, that did get involved, and that was kind of exciting. And we did a whole bunch more like really good stuff that year, and that I learned from in previous years. Again, we got criticized. What was different by that time, I was kind of over it and had realized that a lot of the criticisms were coming from a very vocal minority on
Mm.
campus, and that I had sort of been taking that personally or getting worked up over it. And by the time I was a senior, I was pretty much over it and was like, they're going to say whatever they're going to say. It doesn't matter how I do my activism or what I do, they're going to find some way to criticize it. And so I no longer felt the need to try and defend or really justify or change anything I was doing. But I could tell that the younger students were still very worked up by it and bothered by the criticism we were getting, and in the mindset of like, oh, if we change how we're doing it. Because a lot of people were saying things like, oh, it's not your activism I have a problem with, it's your approach. Like, I agree with veganism and your message, but you're not doing it right. And I think the first time around, I was inclined to be like, oh, let me take this seriously and change my approach. And then I realized that's their issue very much is veganism, and
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
hiding behind that argument. But anyway, my group that I founded ended up continuing on for like another 4 or 5 years, until I think the very last students that I had any contact with had graduated, and then I think COVID happened and a lot of groups disappeared, and so I don't think there's a vegan or animal rights group on campus anymore.
Oh, really? Wow, that's what a shame. What a shame. And also very, very telling that those supposedly liberal, activist minded environments aren't necessarily conducive to
Yeah.
truly radical change or
Yep.
thought corrections. Well, you basically answered one of the questions that I was going to ask, which is you describe yourself as, as sensitive, which I think a lot of us in this vegan world are. I certainly am, and I've talked to a lot of people who identify as more sensitive than normal. And so I was going to ask how you developed that thick skin, that activist minded, just, okay, let's let it roll off our backs and not get to us, this negative response we're getting from a lot of people. Was that a big learning curve for you? Is that something you really had to just consciously cultivate in yourself, or did it just naturally happen over time?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, with more and more experience, it just kind of naturally happened. And at the same time, once I was out of college and began working and surrounding myself with more vegans and activists on a regular basis, I think it also became a lot easier then, because my biggest frustrations were with friends, being friends with people who were not vegan. It's like I could always let go of the random comments online fairly, like that came pretty easily. But then what would be really frustrating is I'd show a documentary or share information with a friend who I really cared about, and I had so much attachment worked up as to the outcome. Like, oh, if I share this information, like that should do it. They should go vegan. And then when they didn't, it was very, very upsetting and frustrating to me, and really did cause some issues with friends.
Mm.
And so I feel like it was very helpful once I had, because up until really my senior year of, until parts of college, like I didn't have any vegan friends when I was in high school. I didn't even know any other people at the high school that were vegan. Even going to college, I kind of expected I'd have a lot of friends there, and I could, it was hard to find someone to start my group with at first. So I still was so surrounded by friends that weren't. And I think having a better support system and network allowed me to not care as much and have less attachment to the outcome, because I wasn't like so attached that I was getting worked up over people I really cared about not changing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, when you're in a friend group where veganism is more normalized and more standard, then it does bolster you and you just feel validated and there's a little less to prove. But yeah, what you're saying just really reminds me, just in my own life, like my immediate family members, and I think this is true for a lot of vegans, even very prominent, activist vegans. Their closest family members often are not vegan. I'm very fortunate to have a brother who's vegan, and I just absolutely love that, and that makes a world of difference. And his girlfriend is vegan as well, so we're a visible contingent that can't be ignored at family gatherings. But my parents are not, my sister is not, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It is. Yeah, we can train ourselves to overlook it and not focus it and not dwell on it. But yeah, it is something that kind of eats at us. And the other comment I wanted to make that struck me when you were discussing this interaction you had with the person whom you invited to have a conversation. That's a beautiful anecdote, because on the one hand, her response was so ridiculous and so preposterous, and at the same time, in many ways, very predictable, because what you were asking her to do, offering for her to do, was precisely what she was avoiding, having to do through this, armchair, arguments, and the online comments where people can be a lot, braver and a lot more brusque and abrasive than they would have the courage to be in person, having a conversation with a real person. So on the one hand, your offer to her was brilliant and just very wise and logical. And at the same time, that was you essentially called her bluff. Like, that's exactly what she didn't want to do, was have a conversation and talk. So very interesting. So what happened after college? What was your career path, and how did it go like you expected?
I was very confused as to what I was going to do after college, because I'd gotten my degree in biochemistry and had kind of thought,
without experimenting on animals.
Yes. Yes, and had kind of thought that I'd do something in the science direction, and then was very burnt out and frustrated by it, specifically around some of the ethics issues. Like, I'd avoided animal testing, but had realized even in biochemistry and some cell biology, which was what I really liked, that there were so many animal products that were still so normalized in the labs. And from
like what kinds of things?
Antibodies, enzymes, fetal bovine serum, like so many different, like, I'd not all of them, but I'd read so many labs, and it's like, oh, what's this? Whatever. Oh, that's a goat antibody. Oh, that's a staining thing that comes from like this glow in the dark fish. Oh, it was like literally so many seemingly little things that you wouldn't think, like, oh, I'm working with some cells or bacteria or other stuff. And it's like all of these things to do experiments. So many of them involved animal products. And it just got increasingly frustrating. I spent a summer interning at a non-animal testing contract lab that I'd been very excited about, until I was there and I realized, even though they don't test on animals and they're specifically providing an alternative to that, they still used, again, fetal bovine serum, cow eyeballs, animal skin and tissue, like in so many of the tests that they ran. So I had a couple experiences like that where I was just getting increasingly frustrated with the science world, and really kind of did want to do something vegan activism like full time, but was very independent and never liked the idea of like working for any of the large animal nonprofits. I wanted to kind of be able to do my own thing. I ended up working with nonprofit animal rights filmmaker, and
involving the film that you mentioned, right?
Yes,
Peaceful
yes.
Kingdom. Yes, which as I've mentioned to you, remains one of my favorite vegan films for people who haven't seen it. Yeah, Peaceable Kingdom: The Journey Home.
Yeah. So I did that for a year and really liked a lot of aspects of that, and then ended up leaving that after a year, and again was a bit confused about what path I was going to pursue. And
it's very confusing, right? Because we can have principles and values and causes that we really believe in, And then when we get into the nitty gritty, like I had a similar experience during my foray into the nonprofit sector, really thinking that, oh, that would just be a different world of just very mission focused, values driven people. And it turned out to be one of the most dysfunctional places I had ever encountered. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. And I think, too, just the more the more time that passes, I just realize even in the vegan realm, obviously we're on the same page about what's happening to non-human animals, but we're all very, very human. And we're all just flawed and, weird and quirky and, like awesome in many ways, but we have the same human feelings that, lots of other humans and lots of other industries do. So it took me a long time to realize that about life, that people could be vegan, but I wouldn't necessarily get along with them or
Yep.
want to be friends with them. And at the same time, it is a bond that I feel with other vegans that I don't feel even with my very close non-vegan friends. So it's not that it doesn't mean anything, but it's also not the just not a silver bullet for strong relationships or healthy relationships. So it sounds like just with your level of activism and your immersion in the movement, it sounds like you got a dose of reality just much, much earlier than I did, and maybe many of us do.
Yeah, definitely had a lot of those, for sure. So it's been a journey. I ended up teaching high school chemistry and environmental science for a couple years, and enjoyed many
Were you able to
aspects.
bring the vegan message into the high schools at all?
Yeah, definitely. So
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite things I did. Um, I was able to develop and teach like a 3-day vegan class at the kind of end of winter break 2 years in a row when I was teaching high school.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I,
Was
yeah,
that part of the regular curriculum or like an additional extra credit class? Like what was it like for the students?
yeah. So it was called like Winterim at the time. It was an interim break class. And so basically they had the students come back onto campus, but for the last like 3 days of winter break, instead of having, well, it was the end of winter break. The first 3 days of classes, instead of having it be normal classes, they had interim classes. And so all the teachers in the school were basically instructed to come up with interactive, hands-on, alternative stuff that they wanted to teach. And
Oh.
all the students were still required to be on campus and take some of these classes, but they could
Uh-huh.
choose like a
Uh-huh.
morning class or an afternoon class, basically. So there were like Kansas City history, where all they did was go out to different museums around Kansas City. There,
Yeah.
some
Cool.
teacher taught a knitting class, and so I, of course, was like vegan class.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the first year I taught an afternoon section and a morning section for 3 days in a row. So I had about 6 to 8 hours total with like a group of students to talk about veganism. Um,
Wow.
and I think I had, over the 2 years, I think I had about 80 students total,
That's a
between the two
lot.
years that took the class.
Yeah.
And
What was the response? What sort of curriculum did you have?
it went really, really well. I kind of split it up. So, like, each day was a different topic. We kind of did health one day, environment one day, ethics one day. And I learned a lot from that. The first year, I started off right away with ethics because I was like, I'm going to come in hard. I want to do this, animal rights, centering the animals. And the reality was, it did not actually seem to work as well as I would have liked. And so the second year I switched it up and I did health and environment first and ethics on the last day.
Hmm.
And that actually worked so much better because I felt like coming in with ethics first, as much as I wanted to do that, students at the high school were way, way more resistant versus, and the first things they would say then would be, what about protein? And what about this? And what about this? And when I covered all of that first, answered all of the stereotypical questions, got that out of the way, and then came in with the ethics, it was like I felt like they actually had to think about what I was saying rather than jump to those immediate
Interesting. Yeah, that makes so much
defenses.
sense. Right, right. Do you think any of them, took that information and actually put it into action?
So I did have them all fill out these cards beforehand. I had them rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they were to like ever go vegan. And I did that before the class and after. And I had like 3 students that put down 1, I'm never going vegan at the beginning of the class, to 10, I'm going vegan at the end. Those were my proudest ones. Most of the students, I'd say, just like increased an average of like 3 to 4 points. They were like, oh,
Yeah.
a 5, now I'm an 8. Oh, but I did have
Yeah.
this couple that went from never going vegan to I'm going to try and go vegan walking out of here. And one student, she gave her senior presentation the following year on the environmental impacts of animal agriculture and presented it to me. So she did try and go vegan, I believe. So that has felt like one of the most directly impactful things I've done, actually.
Yeah, that's cool. And that seems like a really important period in a person's life, where they're just on the verge of having enough autonomy to actually be able to really do the vegan thing, and maybe looking for a way to rebel and, think outside the box and more open to that way of thinking. So you have since gone on to become essentially a professional activist. Tell us how that happened, because I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people who feel strongly about veganism, a lot of people envision that as, just a dream lifestyle, and if only they could put that into place. So tell us what it's like, how the good and the bad and the ugly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd already been doing a lot of speaking and stuff on my YouTube channel on the side while I was teaching. But yeah, that had kind of been my dream, to travel around speaking full time. And I was speaking at Vegan Summerfest, and someone approached me and said that they thought they might have a grant funding opportunity. And so I ended up quitting my job to travel around speaking in schools and universities full time. And that's
And
more
for
or
people who
less.
haven't seen some people haven't seen your van, although we'll certainly include that photo, but tell us about your van and its
Yeah. So I thought, why not push myself out of my comfort zone? And if I really want to travel around full time, like, let me just give up my apartment at the time and go all in on van life. And so I did. And then I also covered the van. It's a converted camper van, in vegan information on all sides. So it's like a giant driving billboard. So I took being a living billboard to the extreme and spent a year traveling around and living out of the van and speaking. And it was a very interesting time. I'm very glad I did it, and I personally am not cut out for van life.
It sounds exhausting. I mean, it sounds fun in some ways, like removing that boundary between your home life and your outside life. But to me, that's just, I'm an introvert, so I just really need that recharge time. So just like being on all the time and being a living billboard, that sounds exhausting. Where did you travel to, and what were some of the places where you spoke?
So I went down the entire East Coast from New York to Florida, St. Petersburg. I don't remember exactly how far I went on what trips, but I went down the entire coast, and I spoke at some different schools and conferences along the way. And then I came up through like the South and Arkansas, came back to Kansas City for a little bit. Then I went through the Southwest and spoke at some schools and in Texas and some different venues that people set up for me, through Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Came back. I've been through most recently. So I don't live in the van anymore, but I still take trips in the van when I do speaking stuff. So I just did like a 3-week trip out to the West Coast. That was my first time with my van speaking out there. So I went through Colorado and then out to LA and did a bunch of activism and some speaking out there, and circled down through New Mexico before coming back to Kansas City.
Wow. And what kind of places do you speak at?
I've spoken at all different venues, everything from, restaurants and meetup groups to my favorite are university classrooms. Those are the hardest to get, just because you basically need a professor, either a student that's really doing the work to get you in, or a professor that's friendly and doing the work to get you in. And as are vegans far and few between, so are vegan-friendly professors.
What subject area are they generally in, the ones who do have you come in?
It's been all over, honestly. Like, I've spoken in a couple English classes. English is a second language. Some, like, you'd think, it would be sustainability or philosophy or something. And the reality is, because most of the way I've gotten in have been people who are vegan and a professor in some random topic. And so they're like, well, I can't really talk about this with my students because it's not my topic and I don't want to be seen as pushing this on them, but I can invite a guest lecturer in. And so that's actually been more common than like a sustainability professor that's like, oh, let's have a vegan speaker. So it's been like history, English, Spanish, like just very random, unrelated classes. A few sustainability classes, but not as many as one would probably expect.
Yeah. So on a slightly different subject, one of the biggest challenges for a lot of us in the vegan world has been the area of personal relationships. And how would you say that veganism, and in particular your very activist positioning in that realm, how would you say that's affected your personal relationships?
A lot. I mean, definitely when I was younger, it made a lot of relationships very difficult, because and the issue for me, it's not like I've had many relationships or friendships where other people are, upset at me or giving me a hard time for being vegan. The hard part for me is if I've shared information with you, or we're going out to eat, or, in social situations, I find it very hard to look at a piece of meat on someone's plate and not always be aware that it's a dead animal. And the reality is I'm aware of that and it bothers me. And I either have to learn to sort of suppress that and shut it off so I can be normal to a certain extent and, just get along with people. Or I'm aware of it and I feel there's constantly issues around when and how much to speak up and what to say, and frustrations at friends not going vegan. So it's definitely had a big impact on my life and relationships. And I am largely at a point in my life where, most of my close friends are all vegan and or activists as well. And it's not, it's not necessarily like I'm out there with a litmus test of like, oh, you can't be in my life if you're not vegan. It's not like that at all. It's just those are the people, those are the environments I'm in now that I've chosen to put myself in. Those are the people that I enjoy spending time around, who respect me and my choices because they understand. And so that's just kind of naturally the way that my relationships have gone at this point. And I'm very open and bold about my opinions and beliefs. And the reality is, I think that's hard for a lot of other people. It's not even necessarily me. It's like other people see my strong opinions, and whether I'm directly judging them or saying I am, I think they assume that and internalize that and sort of or feel guilty on some level and can't handle that.
Right, right. And it's very challenging because even though you certainly are forthright and bold, and obviously you've done a lot of just very courageous, in your face sort of activism, pushing boundaries, even for someone like me who's maybe a little less confrontational, but just constantly, it's a constant push pull with myself as to how much to speak out, how much to suppress. And no matter how little I do let out or express, it's still too much for a lot of people. And I've shared this story before, including on the podcast, but my sister has sometimes complained to me, like, the issue is you're just too confrontational and you're just too direct. And, and I said to her one time, I said, you don't understand. What you hear is I'm suppressing like at least 90% of what I'm thinking and feeling. Like what you're hearing is, probably way more than that, in fact. So what you're hearing, sister, is, the 1% that I allow you to hear, or that I just can't quite, completely, clamp down in myself. And even that, yeah, people are never happy. But I congratulate you on finding and creating that environment for yourself, that actually suits your values and validates your values. And from what I could tell during my visit, it sounds like you have a very, very vibrant animal rights and animal rescue and just, activist environment there. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's definitely growing, and it has not always been that way, but it really does seem like, especially in the last year, locally things have really started growing a lot again in the activist scene. But for the past 4 or so years, yeah, I've ended up meeting a lot of people locally, and it's come in waves in terms of how active we are and what we're doing. Um, but yeah, and then even beyond that, like I've attended a lot of events and convergences and meetups around the country too, and so that's brought me into contact and community with a lot of different people, all working on these issues.
Yes. And you'll be speaking again, of course, at Vegan Summerfest
Yes.
in just about less than a month at this point. So
Uh-huh.
everyone listening, definitely register for Vegan Summerfest. I'll be there. Sarina will be there. Sarina's mom, Joanne, will be there, and lots of other amazing people. So, Sarina, I've got just a couple more questions for you. One is very pragmatic, but have you tried out different ways of eating as a vegan? Any particular, food plans or dietary approaches?
Yeah,
And what's working for you now?
I've tried a lot of different stuff, mostly just for fun. At different times, I have tried fully raw for a number of weeks. I've tried high raw. I've tried, whole foods, no salt, oil, or sugar. I generally lean towards like whole foods, oil free as much as possible.
Yeah, that's me
Lower,
too.
yeah,
That's me too. Yeah.
lower on the fat, higher on the carbs and the protein. And it just comes and goes, and it depends what I'm doing. And I've run a couple half marathons, and right now I'm kind of into the gym and weightlifting. So it depends. And like I went to the Woodstock Fruit Festival, and that's what inspired me to eat a lot more fruit and try, raw at different times. And
Yes, you
yeah,
introduced me to a new fruit at your.
the mame sapote.
Yes. Yes. Describe that for people because I can't even come close.
It's like a big brown skinned fruit that I think it kind of has the consistency and a little bit of the taste of a baked sweet potato when it's ripe, except it's not baked or cooked at all.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Even as I was eating it, I couldn't decide if I liked it a lot or I really didn't like it at all. It was a little confusing. And I think you had said that there was another variety that you preferred to the type that we had.
Yeah, the sapodilla, like the little brown sugar sapote, is kind of their nickname. They're much smaller, and
Okay.
I'm much sweeter, and I much prefer them.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I still haven't tried those. Okay, well, my final question, which I like to ask all my guests, is there a particular word that for you sums up what being vegan is all about?
Um, Peace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Agreed, agreed. For me, it's really too just peace, both externally and internally. Like just knowing that I'm eating in accordance with my values, or at least much closer in that direction than I was before I went vegan, just brings me so much greater serenity. So, yeah, well, congratulations on being born vegan and, just living vegan and thriving as a vegan and just for all the work that you do. Just bring that message, even where it's not always received in the moment. But of course, you're planting seeds. And as we all know, sometimes it takes several interactions with the message to be able to absorb it. So thank you for everything that you do. Wonderful to connect and have you on the show. Again, you've got such a unique experience of growing up in this world and just really embracing it and just making it your own. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
really really cool to see you in action. um, all right. Well, we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all of the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Sarina, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Sarina, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.